Which brings me to my rant today, which I published this morning over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, What If Trump's Conspiracy Was Way Bigger Than We Know? Now, I've had a few guests on the program, Sarah Kedzier in particular, and I have discussed this on the air, and a number of other guests over the years kind of danced around the possibility that Donald Trump was not just a traitor, but was actively colluding with in particular, Putin, to end democracy in the United States and convert the United States from a constitutionally limited democratic republic into a strongman oligarchy like Russia is or like Hungary is. Fox News has been promoting Hungary like there's no tomorrow, a autocratic oligarchy, kind of starting increasingly to model itself after Putin's Russia. The question is, and in fact, somebody on Twitter, I tweeted this earlier, and somebody on Twitter replied saying, no way Trump is smart enough to have pulled this off himself. But what do we know here? What are the things that might lead us to conclude that Donald Trump actually, and perhaps some senior members of his administration, were actually involved in a plot to literally end democracy in America? Now, first of all, some people will say, oh my God, you can't even talk about that. I mean, that's conspiracy, theory, 101. Hartmann, you wrote those books on Kennedy and it warped your mind. Whatever, you've gone off the rails here. Come on, are you serious? A conspiracy to overthrow the United States government? Well, yeah, it happened before. It happened in 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt was president. And Irénée Dupont and his brother and a bunch of other industrialists came in and tried to hire Smedley Butler to assassinate or at the very least kidnap Franklin Roosevelt. They had the help of a 500,000 member neo-fascist World War I veterans group. They had Republicans on board who were going to step in and take over the government. So it's not like this has never happened before. It did happen before. And by the way, none of those guys were ever prosecuted. So, if you're looking at it from their point of view, hey, why not try again, right? So what if this, could this be true? Well, let's start by looking at the Department of Defense. I mean, if Trump was actually going to do a coup from within the government, which is a different kind of coup than the outside the government coup, but a coup from within the government, like Idi Amin did, or like Vladimir Putin did, or like Viktor Orban did, as opposed to the outside the government coup like, Pinochet did down in Chile. If he was going to do an inside the government coup, he would need the assistance of his own military and his own police agencies, which is the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. And what do we know about that? Well, one of the things we know is that on January 4th, Ryan McCarthy, the acting Secretary of the Army, was so alarmed about the planning for January 6th that he was seeing online, and Army intelligence, every one of our military branches has an intelligence service, and they're no slackers, these guys. And they were, sending him the information that, hey, there's something terrible going to happen on January 6th. There's people, they're planning on bringing guns, they're planning on violence. And so Ryan McCarthy sends a memo to Christopher Miller, Trump's acting Secretary of Defense, who, by the way, was put into office illegally. But that's a whole nother rant. In any case, Trump wanted a loyalist there, and he got Christopher Miller. And, he sent a memo on January 4th to Christopher Miller saying, can we have the National Guard there, just like we did for the Black Lives Matter protests? And Miller replied with a January 4th memo, which I printed in its entirety. A photostatic image is the old phrase we used to use, at the end of my article today at HartmannReport.com, if you want to read it. And that memo says basically to the National Guard and to Army Secretary McCarthy, you are not authorized to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, batons, or ballistic protection equipment. You are not to interact physically with protesters. You are not to employ any riot control agents. You are not to share equipment with law enforcement. You're not authorized to use intelligence, surveillance, or reconnaissance. You're not allowed to employ helicopters or any other air assets. You may not conduct searches, seizures, arrests, or other similar law enforcement activity. And you're not authorized to seek support from any non-DC National Guard units. You'll recall Larry Hogan, the Republican governor of Maryland next door, was begging from the time the riot began to send his National Guard troops in, who were literally just 10 minutes away. And no, the Secretary of the Army said, no, you can't do this. Or actually, the Secretary of Defense. So what was Chris Miller up to? I've never seen a reasonable answer to that. Perhaps if you know one, you can call in and inform me. Then we also know that on January 6th, in the middle of the riot, around 2:30 in the afternoon, in the middle of the riot, there was another phone call that Chris Miller was on where they decided again not to send in the National Guard. And who was on that phone call? General Flynn's brother, Charles Flynn. And the Pentagon lied to us, lied to the administration, lied to Congress about this for over a year. Why would they lie about this? And now we just discovered that all these guys in the Department of Defense, Chris Miller, Walter Piott, Kash Patel, Ryan McCarthy, all of them, their phones were wiped after January 6th. What the hell's going on? Did these people think that they were going to be, like in charge of America once democracy was over? I don't know. As I said, at this point, this is entirely circumstantial evidence. You want a conspiracy theory? This is a conspiracy theory. But there's a lot of evidence to support it. And I can only come up with one possible benign explanation. And I'll share that with you on the other side of the break, along with some of the other additional details, like, our spies dropping like flies after Trump asked for a list of spies right after he meets with Putin. I'll tell you about that in just a moment.